start the seminar, so if we need to follow up on this discussion, we can do so afterwards, I guess.
That's all we need to do on that, Galen.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Sorry for the delay in getting going here. We showed up earlier and couldn't get into the room. I'm Galen McGill, ITS manager for the Oregon DOT, and Dean will introduce himself here later, give you some insight into the ITS America meeting, which happened this last week down in Palm Springs. So that's what we're intending to do today. So I'll go through the. I got a few slides here just to hit some highlights, kind of from my observations that I picked up there. And you'll find ITS America is a big enough meeting that several people can go and everybody come away with something a little bit different, depending on what parts of the meeting you participated in. So I think what Dean and I both have to share was somewhat complementary. So let's get started, I guess. This was, like I said, last week down in Palm Springs, and the main thing down there was it was very, very hot for the meeting this year, 107, 108, and there were some outdoor exhibits there, VII demo, that sort of thing, and it was pretty warm out there. But if you haven't been to an ITS America meeting before, like I said, it's a very broad meeting. There's a lot of components to it, including some plenary sessions, which are kind of big sessions where we usually hear some from USDOT or some other national level speakers. Educational sessions are part of it. There's some forum showcases. If you know the ITS America structure, the forums are set up to give people they're kind of interest groups. So it gives an opportunity for people with similar interests to meet and work on ITS-related issues there. So there are forum showcases that are part of the meeting. The exhibit hall, one of the highlights for me really is the exhibit hall. It's one of the meetings I go to where there's actually a significant exhibit hall. A lot of ITS vendors, equipment vendors are there. So it's a good opportunity to interact, talk about specific product issues. So I always plan for a fair amount of time in the exhibit hall to talk to folks about some, whatever particular issues I'm interested in at the time. And probably some of the most value is the stuff that's really not necessarily on the agenda, but there's some networking receptions, but it's the time you spend, lunchtime in the exhibit hall, whatever, with some colleagues from around the country, my peers from other states. So all of those discussions are really a pretty valuable part of the meeting. Anyway, I was going to say if you have questions anywhere through this presentation, go ahead and ask. I've been told to remind you to press the button in front of you there when you do ask the question. One of the things, and some of the things I look for when I go to the meeting is usually, trying to get a feel for national direction, what's going on in the federal program. So I'll go to some of those sessions to try to get a feel for that. So that's part of what I look at. And one of the themes there was we're already starting to talk about reauthorization of the transportation bill. It's September. It ends. The current bill, Safety Rule, ends in September 2009. So I went to a couple of sessions, kind of get a feel where folks are with that. Really, we're pretty early, so there wasn't a lot of discussion. ITS America is just starting its discussion around reauthorization concepts, and one of the things I got from ITS America's viewpoint was there in the safety rule there was a $500 million kind of set aside for ITS that got axed kind of at the last minute due to some politics, and so it got cut out of the bill, and they're hoping to reintroduce that this next time to set aside specific funding, some amount specific for ITS. I don't know probability on that happening. I know there's various other groups that are against those kind of set-asides and prefer to keep flexibility in the bill. ASHA's starting to look at reauthorization as well and looking at what's needed there. And one of the things heard from them was one of the emphasis areas for reauthorization would be better performance monitoring, so better data about what's going on in the system, at least related to the operations area. One of the other realities I think they're bringing into it is just saying, all right, from a funding issue, there isn't going to be a lot of new funding to spread out towards operations. We haven't had an increase in gas tax in a while, and what ASHA was presenting there was saying, well, it would take 3 cents a gallon just to match current funding levels. If you know anything about the current funding levels, we're spending out of the Highway Trust Fund at a higher rate than funds are coming in, and will be in a deficit by 2009. And it'll take a 3 cent a gallon gas tax increase just to get rid of that deficit. And if you want to deal with offset for inflation in terms of purchasing power within transportation, it's going to take a 7 cent increase. So their concept is it's going to take a pretty good gas tax increase just to maintain status quo. So in terms of the idea of additional funding coming for operations, it may not be in the cards. They talked a little bit about tolling as well. From AASHTO's perspective, tolling currently accounts for about 5% of the transportation revenue currently, and said possibly some increase there with the emphasis that's being put on tolling currently. We're hearing a lot about that in a variety of states. Possibly an increase to 7%, but it's not likely to be a significant source of transportation funding. So there were also in the session talking about reauthorization some private sector folks that were talking about some concepts, and they're really pushing for continued federal investment in ITS R&D. There's a fair amount of money spent on that. And one of the things that came up there from the private sector is dealing with access to the right-of-way for implementing the Vehicle Infrastructure Integration Initiative, should it go forward. And there's a lot of debate about that. Who's going to do that? Who's going to build the infrastructure needed for VII? What's the private sector role? What's the public sector role? And how's that going to happen? And finally, just a quote from Neil Schuster, who's talking about ITS America. He is starting to put together a paper on reauthorization, but one of the things he said was their concept is we don't need reauthorization in the sense we don't need to just redo the things we are. We really need to think about a new program direction, a new vision for operations, and reauthorization should rather be development of a new program to promote operations. So that's kind of a quick view of, I guess, various viewpoints at this point, early in the process of talking about the next transportation bill. But there's, I guess, some of the highlights are on that topic. One of the plenary sessions was a U.S. DOT session where they had representatives from the Safety Administration, the ITS Joint Program Office, Federal Highway, and the Federal Transit Association, kind of giving a highlight of their current initiatives. And it's useful to get a broad overview of what the current federal kind of initiatives are. And so what I put down here is a few of those highlights to give you an idea where the federal programs are putting their emphasis. And one of the things I found pretty interesting was from NHTSA, they're coming to the realization that says 90% of the crash issues are related to the driver in some way. It's a driver error issue of some sort. So they've spent a lot of effort focusing on protection. So if you're involved in a crash, what can we do to make the vehicle safer, protect the occupant of the vehicle? They're shifting thinking more now to prevention. So what can we do to overcome driver error and to assist the driver in preventing the crash versus protecting them when they're involved in the crash? So we're going to see from them more focus on developing those kind of vehicle accident or crash prevention kinds of technologies. And some of those, which we'll talk a little bit more about, some of these that are on their list include, this area is called cooperative intersection collision avoidance systems, vehicle infrastructure integration, the integrated vehicle safety systems, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about the exhibit hall. One of the more interesting things I saw there was a display by a company that's doing a lot of development of some of this integrated vehicle safety system technology. And the other piece of that is vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So cars being able to communicate, which is kind of a subset of the VII initiative, but cars being able to communicate between each other. For example, if you got a car ahead that's, braking suddenly or, slowing rapidly, it's communicating back in the vehicles behind it that's occurring. So those kind of technologies kind of let, the vehicle-to-vehicle kind of issue there. So. The next speaker was from ITS, Shelley Rowe from the ITS Joint Program Office, and she talked about some of their initiatives there. And kind of summary of that, they're looking to promote and improve system monitoring and data collection. This is kind of the theme I talked about earlier from what Ash was talking about under reauthorization, but more and better data so we understand what's going on in the system so we can manage it better. They're also interested in in-vehicle safety and improving the kind of partnerships at a local level, between various transportation agencies, between transit and transportation agencies, and that sort of thing. Federal Highway was their primary focus right now is on their congestion initiative. Their spending, and I didn't really understand this or think about it until I got there, but they're currently under a continuing funding resolution. So what happened, there was no appropriation bill this last year, which means Congress didn't have an opportunity to earmark funds. So it's actually given Federal Highway discretionary funding for the first time in quite a while to actually spend some significant funding on initiatives. So they're spending about $1 billion on congestion relief initiatives in this kind of current fiscal year. And we've seen those come out, a number of grant opportunities around urban partnerships, which is really around pricing strategies, looking for cities that are willing to step forward and say they're willing to work with Federal Highway in developing some of those kind of pricing concepts. The other thing they're promoting is this high-occupancy vehicle lane conversion to a toll lane. They've got a bottleneck initiative looking at ways to, reduce the impacts of bottlenecks, and there's got some publications coming out on that later this month. Reducing incident delays is another focus area for Federal Highway. So some of the places where they're looking to promote this, reducing work zone delay, improving signal timing, and the Corridors of the Future program, which Oregon is one of the finalists for. I think a selection will be made later this summer on the final list of Corridors of the Future, but I-5, Washington, Oregon, and California is one of the corridors that's competing for that kind of national designation. The final speaker was from Federal Transit Association. Their focus is pretty much on ITS related to transit. And this is some fairly, I guess, stuff maybe you're more familiar with, but a continued emphasis on ITS technology for managing the transit fleet, fleet management, electronic payment and data collection systems, and traveler information, all still kind of on their plate in terms of ITS kind of initiatives that they're promoting. Next thing I want to talk about is I did attend what's called an information forum, and this is one of these special interest groups. So this is a group deals primarily with data collection and traveler information type of data. And there was a couple technology demonstrations that occurred at the conference that I thought were worth highlighting here because I found them very, very interesting. The first company is a company called Square Loop. They were demonstrating this product that they've developed, and it's really a location-based service. There's been a lot of discussion about location-based services and cell phones, and that's what these folks have done. They've developed something called a mobile alert network, and what they're starting with is pushing traffic data to your phone based on where you're at. And they can filter it based on your velocity and your direction of travel, so they can do directional stuff. And the idea being, if there's something that impacts you, they're able to direct that message to you based on where you are, so they can be very selective about who gets that alert. And they can filter it down to areas as small as 100 meters. So it's pretty precise. And so they're looking at doing that, but in the future maybe doing other kinds. And you've maybe heard discussions of advertising. You're passing the Starbucks, so you get the ad about the special or whatever. So they're talking about those kinds of things, working out some of the models. But they're doing a pilot this summer. It's a product that's going to launch this fall, so it's something will be here soon. I thought it was a pretty interesting technology to actually see that some of that starting to happen. The second company that presented was a company called Dash Navigation, and I found this product pretty intriguing as well, because what it is really it's an internet-connected navigation system. So it's a navigation system you put in your car. It's connected to the internet, and they're doing a couple things with that. They're able to push traffic information, directly to the vehicle, but they're also gathering probe data. So that Dash navigation device is serving as a probe on the vehicle, and it's sharing that data back into their network, and then they're using that combined with public sector data or other types of travel or information, or traffic data, combining it together and providing it out to these other Dash navigation devices. So pretty intriguing concept, but beyond the traffic part of that, the device has some intelligence in it. It learns some preferences based on driver behavior. So, for example, if over time it kind of comes to understand you prefer surface street versus freeway, it's maybe going to give you that preference as first choice for navigation routing. And the other thing I thought was interesting, beyond just the traffic data part of that, is it's got a search engine built into it. So if you're looking for something specific, you want Chinese food or something like that, you can do the search. It searches the internet, brings back results, and then helps route you to gets the address from the browser. Or the other thing to do is get an address from Outlook. So if you got your Outlook where you have your contact lists and you're looking for a specific contact, you can get that address into your navigation engine. So a lot of interesting features. There's about 2,000 units they've got currently out in a test market situation, and expecting to have the unit for sale this fall. And you're going to see it coming out in a national kind of advertising campaign. So they're going to be promoting that nationally. So a couple of interesting products. So that was one of the things you get from ITS America is a view of what's going on the public sector side, what kind of new products are coming out, and what kind of innovation is happening on that front. This is just a graphic showing how that unit's working, gathering data back from vehicles on the network, their dash devices, into their dash network, and back to the a dash vehicle entering that area and giving them kind of more or less real-time, up-to-date data on what's going on in the system. I also attended the Transportation System Operations and Planning Forum. This is another of these forums. Is focused more on, I guess, what you consider more of the public sector operations side of things. They hosted a panel discussion of the 8 pioneer sites selected by Federal Highway for the Integrated Corridor Management Grant, and these are some of the issues they talked about. Quite honestly, I didn't find the discussion terribly enlightening, and it left partway through to go to the exhibit hall. But it was just such a broad group of people, and they were giving such high-level discussions of what they were doing that it didn't really, I think, achieve the objectives of what they're trying to do. But it gives you a flavor for the kinds of discussions that do happen. In terms of technical sessions, I just got a couple more slides to give you an idea of the kinds of things that I got. So I'll give you some highlights from the sessions that I did attend. I actually presented at 2 of these, so that made it easier to make choices of what to attend when you have a couple you have to be at to present. But I did a presentation in this session on travel times, and what I thought I'd do is share with you a couple highlights from those sessions in terms of interesting things that came out. One of the things that was presented in that session, in addition to the one I talked about, which I talked about Portland's effort here, we're working with PSU to develop improved travel time algorithms using our real-time data. But Arizona's developed a system that they put into their airport car rentals center. They're delivering that kind of travel information there, so people flying into Sky Harbor Airport can get current kind of travel time data right before they leave the airport rental center. So kind of an interesting concept, and they did win an ITS America award for that project. One of those sessions I attended was this session on this intersection collision avoidance system, I was impressed, I guess, how far some of these areas have gotten in terms of actually implementing some of this stuff that's actually in place on the system. There's several things going on. California's doing some tests, Michigan's doing some tests, so there's equipment that's been installed and is actually in use there. Minnesota has a similar concept, but it's for, instead of a traffic signal setup, it's for a stop sign, stop-controlled intersection. It's a stop sign assist system, so it's checking, essentially using technology to kind of check the gap so that it's giving people warning if it's safe to pull out. And it's an intersection where they've had a high fatality location. Then the other piece of that discussion was more on the vehicle safety communications initiatives. It has a lot of these kinds of the emergency brake light, which I talked about a little bit earlier, the stop vehicle head kind of warning where the cars are communicating, the cars coming up behind them, and various other things, collision warning, curve speed warning. So a lot of that technology is really coming along. And I'll talk about that a little bit more Like I went to session talking about VII is one of the things I was kind of trying to get an idea from ITS America is where things were at with that. We're leading up to a November 2008 decision whether or not that initiative will move forward or not, so a lot of these pilots are in full swing. And one of the things presented there is if you do get a chance to go to ITS America next year, it's combined with the 2008 World Congress, and there's a really major full-scale kind of VI demo plan for that meeting that's going to happen there in New York. Attended a couple other sessions, one on incident management and operations, and the other one on systems engineering, which I presented on kind of Oregon's approach. But if you're familiar with ITS, you may be familiar with the Rule 940, which requires the development of an ITS architecture and use of ITS standards in systems engineering ITS projects. So it's a pretty good theme, and it showed up a lot of places in the conference, but this was a specific session on systems engineering. And probably the key thing to take away from that is there's a lot of kind of federal resource material out there, and I didn't put the website link on here, but if you go to the Federal Highway Operations link, there's a lot of data there around systems engineering tools to help you in deploying that. But the rule does require on ITS projects to utilize a systems engineering approach. So if you're going to be working in ITS, you need to be familiar with systems engineering and how that applies to project delivery. So finally, I just want to say a word about the exhibit hall. There's a lot of vendors there, and I spent quite a bit of time there, so talking to various vendors about specific projects or issues, or trying to interest them in RFPs we have coming out and that sort of thing. But I thought the most interesting thing to me was not necessarily something that I'll make use of, but it's really interesting to see how vehicle technology is coming along. And ITS America has this Vision Zero campaign where they have this vision of having 0 fatalities at some point in the future. And I guess the stuff I saw in this is it makes me think that there's a lot still coming on the vehicle side in terms of vehicle intelligence. It's going to really help make progress towards that vision. And so this particular booth it's this truck trailer. You see the picture of it there, but they had that in an exhibit hall, and it was kind of like going to a Disneyland. In there, you walked in, there was there was seating, a little small theater in there, had about 5-6 seats in there, and you strapped yourself in with a seatbelt and put on your 3D glasses, and they ran you through some simulations of various situations, rollovers, crashes, that sort of thing, without the technology and with the technology in place. So it was kind of enlightening to see what the technology did in kind of a simulated environment. But they were kind of demoing these specific things, this lane departure warning system that uses some cameras to detect when the car is about to leave the lane, and it gives you some feedback to the driver in the sense of, in this particular demo, that your seat would vibrate. It's kind of like driving over a rumble strip, but this is it gives you the feeling of that, but the vehicle's doing that. They demoed this active rollover protection system that actually, these are active systems. A lot of the safety systems, they've been passive systems, but these are active systems that actually interact with the steering and the braking to prevent a crash. And this is a concept they call active-passive integration. So and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I think I got a slide or two coming up. But this slide is just kind of showing came from some of the literature I picked up there, but it's a slide showing kind of the development of in-vehicle technology and what's happened over time and how this stuff has happened to date. And the next major step is this active-passive integration. What it's doing is taking all these sensors in the vehicle and networking them together, networking all these passive safety systems together and networking with active systems into this essentially onboard computer that they call the danger control module. And what it's doing is it's gathering all this input from all these sensors, and it's calculating the probability of a crash, and then it starts initiating a staged hazard response. And what it's trying to do is to avoid the crash, and if it determines the crash isn't possible to avoid the crash, then it starts doing things to minimize injury. And some of the things they demoed there in the demo is that it'll pre-tension your seatbelt and do some things like that. It'll close windows, and it will move your seat to the optimal position, et cetera, to minimize injury if it determines the vehicle is going to be in a crash. But the first step is to start doing a progressive set of actions to avoid the crash, whether that's interacting with the braking system, interacting with the steering system, giving you some feedback into the steering wheel, for example. So you can override it, but you'll maybe feel some stiffness to kind of tell you maybe you need to be steering back the other way. So kind of interesting to see a lot of pretty sophisticated technology coming into the vehicle. Finally, I just thought I'd mention is if you're thinking all about attending or have opportunity to attend ITS America, next year is the first time they've done this, but they're actually combining the ITS America annual meeting with the ITS World Congress. It'll be in November next year, 2008, and so they're expecting 10,000 people for this event, probably one of the largest ITS events we've ever seen. But as I mentioned earlier, one of the big highlights there is going to be a very large-scale VII demo that's going to happen on the streets of New York there. So anyway, any quick questions before I turn it over to Dean, and he'll give you a overview of his perspective on the meeting. Dean?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Dean Deeter with Athey Creek Consultants here in the Portland area, and I think I'll be able to give kind of the private side, and I think it'll complement Galen's pretty well. This was I think it was my 12th ITS America annual meeting I've been to, and I've seen them grow, and then I've seen them kind of scale back, and I think this one was bigger than the last couple of years, but not as big as it was back around the 98, 99 time. That's when it was really large sessions. The location was nice, as Galen said. It was really hot there. The setting was a nice setting, though, and the exhibit hall wasn't as big as it had been in the past. There was several years there where ITS America got a lot of the auto manufacturers or a lot of concept vehicles there, but there were some new things there, as Galen mentioned. So I think what I'll try to do is I'll try to give you the private side perspective, and I think if you follow two people at a conference like this, public sector and private sector, they have different motivations and different objectives what to do. I think Galen already talked about the various things that were going on there. The themes that I took into it, and again, what I try to do at these conferences is, much like Galen, try to get an idea of what new technologies are coming, what new products are coming, but I also have to be thinking about projects that I'll be able to work on. So I'm also looking to see what themes might relate to projects that are coming out in the near future from various states. VII was big this year, especially the California presence. I spent a lot of time in the booth session talking to the people down in the Bay Area, and I thought it was worth mentioning some of this, and this ties in actually with some of the products that Galen mentioned. A lot of those are in the Bay Area. But just to give you an idea a little bit, the VII demo they have there's about 5 or 6 major areas that they're focusing on, and the one I found most interesting was the curve overspeed warning, and the approach they're taking with that is that in their design, in a VII world, the curves will all have their geometries stored there, and they'll be sending that out electronically to vehicles approaching. So a vehicle would get this receipt of information about what's the geometry of this curve, and the vehicle would make a decision about, based on what that vehicle is, what type of vehicle it is, and in theory, the quality of its tires, how full they are, things like that, how high it is, the weight of it, whether or not it's a safe speed, and then it would adjust the speed down or recommend the speed down. So putting all the onus on the vehicle to make those decisions. But I thought that was interesting of the approach they took with that. Travel time information providers, it's a lot going on right now in the industry with a lot of companies like INRIX and AirSage and some other companies working with the cell phone providers to prepare and present private sector travel time services for the states. And there were several sessions I went to where they were presented, and there's just a lot of talk about these in the receptions and that. Up in Minnesota, I'm actually involved in a project that's waiting for the data that's going to come out of that. They're doing a test of the air stage system. They gave a presentation down there, although they're just early in the phases of it, so they didn't really have any conclusive results. But there's just a lot of states are trying to learn how it's going, because a lot of states are signing up for those. A lot of states are trying those. There's been some independent consultants that were hired. I think INRIC's hired one and did a big study of that to compare themselves. But the big hub is everyone wants to know how well they work. And it seems like the number of states that are signing up, or number of states expressing interest or looking seriously at that, continues to grow. So I think it's a big topic, and I think over the next year or two we'll really begin to understand just both how feasible it is and what the business model that shapes out of that. In the opening session, several people really emphasized the push for rapid deployment. In past years, there's been maybe sometimes more of a research focus, sometimes more of a focus on the 10 to 12 years out there, but there was a lot of emphasis on getting states to deploy quickly and pushing the deployment, get things out there, get things working. And then Galen talked about, but I thought it was worth mentioning quite a bit, there's the systems engineering process. Again, it's very big. There was a pre-conference workshop going on in the room next to the ITS State Chapters Council. I knew several people that were in that workshop, and they all thought they got quite a bit out of it. And I think it was USDOT that put that on. If you show me right, Nathaniel? I think they put that on, and it was well received. Many sessions referenced it. It's really the cornerstone of the projects. When you look at the projects that Galen mentioned, the big federal DOT initiatives, the CCAS, the integrated corridor management, all of them are centered around the system engineering process, even so much so that the integrated corridor management, the 8 pioneer sites, what they're funded as right now is to go through the first 2 stages of the system engineering process. They're funded to do the concept operations and the requirements, and then they're going to make the decision before they go on any further. So long gone, no more here's a pot of money, please use the system engineering process. They're really forcing it to happen. And there's also, in those projects, there's a lot of technical support from USDOT, both from themselves as well as consultants, to work with the states. So it is really something where you begin to see all the states coming together and doing it, not necessarily exactly the same way, but in a uniform way, so that all the projects interact together. Mileage-based pricing, and Galen talked about this quite a bit with regards to the reauthorization and the rethinking of everything. The urban partnership agreement proposals had been submitted. They now announced kind of, I think, the 9 semifinalists. They hadn't been announced at that point, or maybe it was right at the end of the conference. But those are all out there. So there was a lot of talk about mileage-based pricing, those demonstrations that are going on, congestion mitigation initiatives that the USDOT is doing, and just mileage-based pricing in general. A lot of states are feeling their way through that. And Minnesota had taken steps towards doing something like that, with awaiting knowledge of whether they should move forward with it, because there's the Republican National Convention coming up there next year. So you're beginning to see a lot of very political things come into this, with tying with election and things like that. The mileage-based pricing and the reauthorization, it's a huge new way of thinking about it, and it's at the level all the way up at the presidential level of people who are getting involved with what might go. Galen mentioned the integrated corridor management. I brought this up here because this year ITS America, they really had a focus on promoting these 8 pioneer sites, and the 8 pioneer sites are still early in the process, and I know what Galen means by that session is it was kind of early and kind of high level to get much value out of it, but there's really different than many years in the past. I think they were using ITS America to really do outreach and technology transfer to the other states that are involved. So unlike in the past where there might be federal operational tests which are funded, and you see 2 or 3 states that win it, and they kind of go off and they do their project, and there's an evaluation that's funded, and then they come and they present it at the end. There really is much more of an involvement of all the states throughout the process this time. So there was a big couple of sessions on this. They had giant posters prepared for each of those. They had people from each of the states involved in it, material and all that. Not just to talk about what they're doing and how great it's going and all that, but really to share the technology transfer and to have interactive sessions with other states to kind of pull of it. it's still a tough thing, of course. It's hard to pull in 50 states when you're funding 8, but it was definitely a very concerted effort to do that, and I think took steps towards that. And finally, I kept it kind of short and sweet, but there's just a lot of enthusiasm and interest about the next meeting. Like Galen mentioned, the VII demo, they had it at ITS America. It was out in the parking lot, and you can sit in the vehicle and see how it happens. As Lana mentioned, we're arranging for it to be here. Ideally, it'll be a suitcase that's installed in the rental vehicle, and people will be able to sit in it and ride around and see how VI interacts. But what they're talking about next year is, the streets of New York, equipping the streets, equipping the intersections, so you go out in live traffic and you drive around or you see that. And that they're even going to have a traffic management center, which would be what the traffic management centers in a VII world would be like, and how those would interact with the vehicles and everybody. I guess a mock TMC, but operational for the demonstration. So it's a huge step, and that's the month that they're supposed to decide if they move forward. So I don't know when that real decision will be made, but it will be a big thing. And I work a lot with people in New York DOT, and I know they've been planning this meeting, the state chapter and New York DOT, for I think close to a year now already. So it's going to be a big conference and a big effort. So. And Galen mentioned the receptions. This year they were well attended, and a challenge with ITS America. One thing is whenever it's in a really nice location, I'm always less enthusiastic to go, because when there's a lot to see, it competes with people's time. And when it was in San Antonio, Texas, I think the sessions were probably the most poorly attended, because I think people just love to get out and walk around. So it was too hot to really do anything outside of here, so everyone stuck around. And they had a pool party, which meant stuff set up on the sidewalk by the pool, but they were misting water over it to keep it a little bit cooler than everything else. So there was a lot of talking, a lot of people there, not a lot of federal highway people there, I think, because of some of the travel restrictions. Surprisingly, not as many California people. Usually when there's a conference in California, whether it be the World Conference or World Congress, there's a real large contingent from California, but maybe they've kind of had a lot of conferences for a while. But several friends of mine drove up for the day who are transportation professionals in LA, so the chance for them to drive up during the day. But other than that, that was my perspective. It was useful to go to. If anyone has a chance to go next year, I think it's always a good thing to do. And I think you get more out of the exhibit halls than the sessions. Sessions are kind of hard to choose them, and they're kind of hard to tell what's going to happen in them just on the titles and things like that. It was funny. The one that was most widely attended was the one where Minnesota was reporting on the early results of the Air Sage trial. That was late in the day. It was 4 to 5:30 on the second day, but it was packed, and everyone wanted to hear the results of that. So every once in a while you have a few of those hot sessions where there's a topic that is everyone's waiting to hear some outcomes, or it somewhat could be contentious. So. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Dean.
Sure.
Thank you, Galen. Just before we go, I just want to tell these guys thank you. My name is Ed Anderson. I'm Vice President of ITS Oregon, the Oregon chapter of the ITS America. And we meet third Friday of every month somewhere in the Portland area. And you're all welcome to attend. We have a meeting. Our website will announce the meeting time and location. It does vary. I wanted to remind you that ITS Oregon is hosting the VII, planning on hosting the VII event if it gets finalized at the region's ITE meeting in July 18th. So if you're interested in the VII and the technology that it presents, if it is finalized, we'll have a demonstration out here. We obviously would like to see any or all of you come to our monthly meetings, events, conferences. Information can be found on our website, itsoregon.com, I believe.
.org.
.org? Okay. And just wanted to say thank you for coming, and if there's any questions for me or for Galen, for Dean, they're leaders in the ITS field in the state of Oregon, and if you have any questions, let us know. If not, enjoy your Friday, and have a good weekend. Any questions?
No questions from cyberspace.
Okay.
You're listening.
Well, just a quick question for Galen. You mentioned, what was it, InDash and some other, the ones there at the exhibition hall that were collecting data to use for their kind of own purposes in terms of routing vehicles and such. Is any of that information, would there be the possibility for public agencies to get a hold of some of that information for their own data?
So specifically discussed with Steve Wollenberg with Dash Navigation, very open to the idea of sharing data with the public sector, or pretty much anybody. They're not, they don't see themselves in the market space of a data aggregator trying to sell data, which a lot of the, like Inrix or other companies, that's their market niche. Right. Their market is really selling these devices, navigation devices, and the services go with it. So they were very open to the idea of sharing that data. So they would welcome discussion on that to get any of their probe data.
Assuming the subscribers were okay with sharing their data or whatever, I guess.
Well, I'm sure that's not, you're not getting specific,
right?
It's going to be generic, privacy protected kind of stuff. So.
Great.
Rich?
Yeah, one question I had was about the recent news in New York City of like congestion pricing of Mayor Bloomberg's proposal. And I was just wondering if that was discussed at all during the ITS meeting in Palm Springs, if they talked about the issue of if there's any consensus on the idea of congestion pricing in American City.
That's what the Urban Partnership Program is all about. And some city, I'm assuming New York's one of the cities that signed up under that program, but I didn't hear any specific discussions about their proposal there. Other than, that's Federal Highway is promoting that concept, and I think New York's one of the cities that stepped forward, so we're interested in working with you on it. So.
Yeah, and I hear they have a pretty unique and innovative approach. As I understood it, just from conversations heard around the exhibit hall, is that they're actually proposing to lower the cost of the bridge, the tolls on the bridges, and then to implement more of a mileage-based pricing when you're in Manhattan, with the idea of those people coming across, staying on the ring road and going off wouldn't pay anymore, which is opposite of what I would have guessed. I would have guessed they would just toll the bridges, based on the time of day. But that was kind of the early thing that I had heard from that. No details or no specifics, but.
Anybody else? All right. Let's have a great Friday.
Doug Sullivan, Cambridge Society. Ed Anderson. Nice to meet you, Ed.